Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's family webinar. We appreciate you joining us and looking forward to a great discussion on the new school readiness. Our first guest today, Rachel Robertson, Vice President of Education and Development here at Bright Horizons.
Hi, everybody. It's Rachel, and I am thrilled to be with all of you today. I love talking to parents about early childhood development. I am fortunate to lead the early care and education components at Bright Horizons, as well as professional development for our wonderful teachers and leaders. And I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, esteemed early childhood development expert, Kathy Hirsh-Pasek. Kathy, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It is a pleasure, Rachel.
All right. So tell us, can you give us a little bit about yourself to introduce yourself to the group so they know who you are and what your expertise is?
Well, my real expertise right now is being a grandmother of two adorable children, ages 2 and 4. Jules is the 2-year-old and Ellie is the 4-year-old. And in my other life, I have 3 sons who I'm super proud of. And I am a professor at Temple University and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution doing science and language and literacy in play and in the bridge between the science of learning and early education.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. And I know I started interacting with your research and work long ago when I had young children reading your book about Einstein never using flashcards. So that's my baby gift of choice these days. So
thank you.
So for our agenda today, we have a lot to talk about. We are using this terminology around new school readiness, but we're going to start with just the idea of what is school readiness, and then through that conversation laying the groundwork about what's new, why are we using the phrase new, and then get into the research around this framework of 6 C's that Kathy and her co-author, Roberta Galenkoff, wrote about in their book, Becoming Brilliant, What Science Tells Us About Raising Successful Children. So with that agenda in mind, let's jump in. We have a lot to talk about today. This topic of conversation is one we talk about a lot at Bright Horizons, is on the mind of a lot of parents. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts, Kathy, and then get a lot of interaction from you joining us on the call. So let's start with some basics. What exactly is school readiness? We use that phrase quite a bit, but we don't always define it or have the same definition when we're talking about it. I think for a long time we've really thought about school readiness as mostly a set of cognitive skills, and it's become really narrow and focused on academic skills primarily. Really those 3 R's: the writing, reading, and arithmetic. That's not really what school readiness should be, but that's often what we're talking about, or what someone's thinking about when they're thinking about school readiness. And this narrowing of the definition, or how we think about preparing children for school, has been perpetuated by so many things. I think a couple that stand out to me are the proliferation of, and I'm going to use air quotes, educational toys, because there's not a lot of regulation about that terminology. So there's so many apps, so many toys that claim that they are building a child's education from birth, before birth sometimes. And then the intensity of testing or assessments has really narrowed our focus inappropriately, but it has had that effect on us. So I'm going to propose that we just take a step back when we're thinking about school readiness, and before we get into the exact skills, and just consider what school readiness is, because this is really a phase on the continuum of child development. It's an important phase, but it's one of the phases. It's really about that time that we want to make sure that children have the foundation they need before they get into formal schooling, or as they progress through the levels of formal schooling. And just like parents, educators alike, we all want to be sure that children have that really strong foundation, both skills and capacities, so they will thrive in the next year, but not just the next year, for long term. So having this broader and longer term view of school readiness is really helpful, and not just thinking about what kids need to be able to pass a pre-kindergarten assessment or some sort of test that we have in mind. So here's the broader definition, and as we think about all of these things that really prepare a child to have a strong foundation for school and life, we're going to transition over to the great research that Kathy has done. So just to give us a framework here, what we're thinking about, we are talking. I mean, those 3 R's are important, certainly, but it's not just about knowing them. We really want to think about how those skills are applied. We also know that social emotional skills are critical for school and lifelong success, and that they are happening in conjunction and developing in conjunction with cognitive skills, cognitive broader than academic, but including academic skills. Critical thinking and problem solving are essential capacities for children to have, not just being able to absorb information, but to do something with that information, to use it to solve real problems, and just the process of thinking something through, making decisions, prioritizing. We live in a world that innovation and creative thinking could not be more important. These children are growing up to not just be the knower of facts that already exist, but the creators of new content and information. The next iPhone inventor is out there somewhere. So we need them to be innovative and creative, and to love learning, and to have good dispositions for how to acquire new knowledge and how to use that new knowledge. And knowing this is really what school readiness and early learning is about, and that we have the ability to create this foundation in early learning is one of the reasons I've been so interested in the research that Kathy and Roberta have done, because it does provide us a new framework for how to think about the early years. So I kind of alluded to it on our last slide, but I'll just emphasize this a bit more, is why it matters for us to have this new perspective on school readiness. It will take all of us to shift this focus, but it's critical that the children deserve it from us. It leads to all sorts of positive outcomes for them in the near term and in the long term, but also the world of the future requires it from them. They'll be more successful in all different ways when they have this broader foundation and a more successful school and life career trajectory on the way to their future. Just to note a couple studies that one analysis of more than 200 studies of programs that teach social emotional skills found that these efforts significantly improved so many other things that we all care about: behavior, how children felt about school and learning, their achievement overall, even the safety of the schools. And another really compelling study correlated that higher levels of social competence in kindergarten and this study controlled for all other factors, that the higher levels of social competence in kindergarten were correlated with the likelihood of going to college and having full-time jobs. So it's not just nice, it's not just what we want to have for children, it makes a huge difference for them. So with all that in mind, we're using this terminology "new" in this webinar together, and we're talking about Kathy's research. Tell me, Kathy, why do you feel like this is new, or why is the word "new" applied to this way to think about school readiness?
Well, in a way, it's kind of revolutionary because, as you rightly say, in the past, we have only thought of school readiness as reading, writing, arithmetic. And even that has changed in the past few years. A recent study that came out in 2016 suggested that kindergarten is now being viewed as the new first grade. And, we just keep pushing down and pushing down. But in reality, what we're finding in the science of learning is that the social skills that you mentioned turn out to be really critical if you want to build a foundation for later academic skills and social skills and critical thinking. And that's because we've learned that pretty much everything is gated through what we might call a social brain. That is, human beings are fundamentally social from the get-go. And that's how we learn. So I think we have to rethink, especially in a time of so much digital. I happen to be a fan of digital, but I realize that sometimes the digital can get in the way of our learning as well. So we have to learn how to balance things. What does it mean when information is doubling every 12 hours? What is going to count as success in 2019 and in 2029? And that's the question before us. So that was what this book was about. It's asking, what counts as success today? How would you define it?
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable way to look at it, is thinking about the world of the future and what we can do now to prepare children for success in that world of the future. I think if we all think back about, no one was teaching me how to use an iPhone in kindergarten, but they certainly taught me the skills to learn and to research and to think critically, and all of those all of those skills were the things that helped me be successful now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we also don't tend to really note how dramatic this change has been. So if I could poll your group for just a moment, just think about this to yourself. When do you think the iPhone came into being? All right, now that you thought about it, I'll tell you that it came out in 2007. So the children who are 12 today, all right, they're just in middle school. They have lived their whole life with an iPhone. The iPad, which dramatically changed our lives and our children's lives, came out in 2010. So the kids who have lived their whole life with an iPad are only 9 years old today. And it makes us really think about, again, what do we want for our children? I've polled a lot of parents on this. And it's interesting, when you ask it that way, what counts as success, people don't just say, oh, I want my child to be good at reading, writing, and arithmetic. What they say is, I want them to be strong thinkers who are good at these skills, but I'm after happy, healthy, thinking, caring, and social children who will become collaborative, creative, competent, and responsible citizens of tomorrow.
Yeah, we hear that a lot from parents as well, and I think that it's interesting to see the difference between what's tested or what people feel there's a lot of pressure on to succeed at school versus what they really want for their children.
Well, and also what I think most of us don't know is that these things that are best for our children actually are also better for how they're going to perform at school. So it's a double win.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So actually, on that note, let's transition. Let's get deeper into a conversation about these 6 C's, because I think that's I recognize that a lot of questions came in from parents about school readiness and preparation and when is the time for this and when should my child know this. And I think a lot of that will either be answered or maybe reframed in our conversation about 6 C's. So just before we get into each one of them specifically, just give me a general, what is this framework of 6 C's? What is it all about?
Sure. Well, what this framework was is we wanted to look for the suite of skills that we thought the science could support and that is measurable, and the suite of skills that also is malleable. That is, you work with these are things that can be changed. So what we came up with, we had to shoehorn it a little, to be honest with you, to get to 6 C's. But what we came up with is first collaboration, getting along with other people, building relationships, building community. The second was communication. Now, learning how to listen, we don't do that so well today. We're the first to put up our Facebook post and to blab rather than hearing others. To learn how to speak respectfully and to communicate our ideas and to read, that goes under communication. And communication is built on knowing how to get along with other people. Then there's content. That's your traditional stuff. It's the 3 R's, but it's also learning how to learn. Because if it's really true that information is doubling every 12 hours, then if what we do is commit things just to memory, and I'm not saying never use memory, but if it's a just memory kind of world, well, even if we knew all the information that we could possibly know today, in just 12 hours, we're only going to know 50% of it. So it's not as useful as it used to be when we were monks trying to memorize the Bible. Built on content is critical thinking, that ability to sift through mountains of information, creative innovation, to create something novel with the information that we have, and confidence, the ability to persevere, even if we don't get it right the first time. This is hard for our kids, but we can help them with this. And to have a growth mindset, the I can do it rather than I can't.
That's really helpful to hear you talk through each of them, and yeah, it's nice how it fits in this nice 6C package, but the shoehorning it certainly makes sense, and I think it really works, though, and in your deeper explanation of each of them sets us up for a really nice conversation as we dive deeper. I think the next slide shows a graph that I find very interesting. Can you share with us a little bit about this 4 stages of progress and how you think about that, how the development unfolds?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, again, I don't want you to think of these as hard stages, but they give us a sense, and we can see by looking at this all laid out, not only where our children are, but actually where we are, what opportunities we give our children. So let's just take a look at a couple of them. Let's try collaboration. We, all of us, at least I know I did, have a child or two who likes the on my own. I'm going to do it myself, my own self. And that's the kid or the person in your office who hangs out in their cubby. They may look side to side, but rarely. They're doing it their way, and they'd rather not be in the group. I actually had a son who was like that. Everybody else was doing something and playing around, and my son was in the corner doing puzzles. And that's when he was about 4 or 5. And number 2, when you move a little bit up on the rung and become more collaborative, you can reach the side-by-side. Now, this is often known in the literature as the parallel play. I'm playing with my toy, you're playing with your toy, and every so often I look over and give you a glance. Now, that's very different than doing things that are back and forth. In the office, this is the person who writes draft 1, sends it to person 2. Person 2 then adds edits and then sends it back to person 1. And our children do that too, especially when they're building with blocks. They may start something, you add something, then someone else adds something else. And of course, the level that we put as 4 is when you build it together. When you sit down in that classroom and a couple kids get together and say, we're going to build a castle. And then they collaboratively figure out how to build that castle. Or to take another one, let's go with critical thinking. This is sort of fun, especially in the current political climate, because from both ends, you have the seeing is believing. Well, it must be that way because that's what I saw on the ground. It must be that there's no global warming because it was cold out today. Then you reach a point where you say truths differ. Well, I have a different opinion I have a different truth than you do, but I'm right. The third level could be, well, maybe it's not about right and wrong. Maybe we should start to listen to each other. I mean, I have an opinion and you have an opinion, and I'd like to hear your opinion. And then the highest level here is, well, what's the evidence? Can you bring something to bear on it that could show me one way or another whether there's really any climate change going on? Now, a lot of times we think that our kids can't do critical thinking, but boy, have they surprised me. I remember one day I was reading a book about Babar the elephant, and one of my 3-year-olds stopped me and he said, I have a question. And I said, well, what is it? He said, do all vehicles have wheels? Well, I said, no, not all vehicles have wheels. And we thought about it and thought about it. And then he gets up from the couch, runs upstairs and comes back with a different Babar book, which he has opened to the page where Zephyr got a new boat from Babar, and it was being rolled over to the lake. And of course, my counter example was going to be a boat. But now my son, it just showed me critical thinking that boats do have wheels.
Ah, that's a really good example, when they're piecing information from previous experiences with new information, trying to incorporate it together.
Yeah, so we put these down. Again, they're loose, but they're based on the science. And it gives everyone a chance to say, so who am I? Am I a build-it-together kind of collaborator? Am I somebody who enjoys dialogue, or would I rather be show and telly? In the content, do I have expertise in something? Am I making connections? Or am I the kind of person who just has a lot of factoid knowledge that's more shallow, but of course is great at parties? Am I the kind of person who listens to others? Or am I more the truth stiffer? And when we start to see who we are, we can begin to see who we are as parents and what we present to our children as we build these skills.
Yeah, I've seen this chart, and I always think about children and how to support their development or scaffold their development from one area or one thing that they're doing, something like on their own, to side-by-side play. But it's been, I'm smiling to myself as if thinking about myself at work or coworkers at work, and I think probably people are thinking about their families and how they interact with their children as well. So it's a nice twist on that chart. But one of the things you've said a couple times I just want to emphasize is how important this is that the practices and policies haven't always caught up with the science of early learning. And so this is an opportunity for us as educators and parents to catch up, to listen and think about the science and what the science is telling us and apply that to our practices and our expectations. And one of the areas that I think that this is needed so emphatically and so it's so important is this whole idea of play. So I just want to touch on play because I know this is a research area of yours as well. But, I know from talking to parents and just hearing, even seeing some of the questions, that parents feel a lot of pressure about preparing their children for school and are they doing it right. And one of the things that I think is so encouraging is that there are no special programs, toys, apps, tutors, any of that stuff needed to develop children's skills in these areas. That one of the best ways is letting them play and supporting their joyful engagement in investigation and wondering about things and critical thinking, like you're talking, just through story time, and that adults can support that through questions or materials or giving them little prompts. But there's nothing out of the ordinary, nothing special, no money to be spent on tutors necessary to prepare their children to be successful in school, especially around all these 6 C's that we're about to talk about even more.
Yeah, absolutely true. And it's interesting. I think what it does require is for us to think a little bit differently as parents so that we kind of see the world through a new lens, one that is ripe with opportunities. And I'll give you an example, if I may.
Sure.
I was going on a little walk, and I mean it was really a little walk through a little forest area in Michigan with my granddaughter Ellie. She was 3 at the time. And we noticed something really cool happened in between the trees. Now, it didn't cost us anything to go in between the trees, but we noticed that there was a shadow, and the shadow would appear, and she just thought this was the coolest thing ever. Now, I saw it as a real learning opportunity, so I picked that moment, and I said, wow, when we go under the tree, the shadow disappears. But when you go between the trees, the shadow comes back out. I wonder what's going on. And boy, she really took to it. And I said, let's test it. And we made a little science game out of it to see if I was right. And she kind of generalized with me. And then I said, well, can you make a prediction? Look at that big word snuck in there. Mm-hmm. Can you make a prediction as to when the shadow is actually going to appear? And so she started saying, it's going to appear now, it's going to appear now. And there we were amidst a science lesson, making predictions and testing whether our hypotheses were correct. And it's remarkable when you think of just everyday moments where you have an opportunity to make them teaching moments or learning moments, even better than teaching moments, where you both notice something and it becomes way more powerful than most of the apps on the market.
Right. Yeah, I think you refer to it as playful learning, or I hear guided play. It's just go with it. Ask them questions, get them thinking, experiment, to use their play to introduce big words or big concepts, and have fun. And that's just as valuable or more valuable than any of the quote unquote educational toys or games or apps out there.
Yeah, I think even more, because you can see the wheels turning. And sometimes they just give you the darndest answers, and you'll be both amused and enchanted by listening to what they tell you. And it doesn't really, like, where does water come from? How do we know a fish isn't going to come out of the spout of the bathtub? I mean, these are cool things to ask about. Why is the toilet flushing the way it does?
Yeah, and assuring parents that they don't always have to have the answer, and that's.
Oh, I don't know the answer to most of this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to some of those questions you just asked, but that is really lined with our curriculum philosophy at Bright Horizons as well. Is that's the teaching methodology that we use? Is this kind of, well, let's find out together. Let's explore that. Let's learn through our play.
Yeah, exactly. And, sometimes it can be just such simple stuff, like sometimes we play a game where we see how many steps it takes to get across a room.
Yeah.
What would it happen if we added more steps? What would happen if we did less? We just made it into a math game. There's STEM readiness.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, so we're having this great conversation about play and how it's just really easy for adults to support children's development in these 6 C's. But let's dig deeper into those 6 C's. So I'd like to go through each one, starting with collaboration, and just hear from you just to define it a little deeper than you did earlier. What does collaboration look like? What should parents be looking for?
Yeah, well, collaboration is as you think it is. It's really about building relationships by doing things together. And you can do this in so many different ways. Sometimes it's your child starts on a project, and I heartily recommend that what we do is look at what they're interested in and follow in on what they're interested in and ask them questions. But not the kind of questions like, is that red or green? But ask them, wow, I wonder what you're making, and let them tell us. Because the more open-ended those questions are, the more conversations we get, and the more collaborative it seems. And all of us feel better when we're working with other people, not being told what to do. So collaboration is about building those skills. And there are plenty of ways to do it. Rolling balls back and forth, clapping games, drawing together. So any of these build collaboration.
So, Kathy, we're getting a question in chat that is asking about, maybe specifically about this one or all the 6 C's, but if you could touch on how, do any of these develop differently, or should parents be thinking about anything differently depending on the number of children at home? So if there's an only child versus a child with siblings?
Yeah, not really. I mean, obviously, if it's an older sibling, they'll be a little bit farther ahead. But the basic principles of looking at these suite of skills is the same whether you're solo or you have sibs. And in fact, in many of them, that's what siblings are so great for. They help us get through a lot of these different levels ever more quickly. In collaboration in particular, you better learn how to get along with someone else if you're a little dude and your big brother controls the roost.
Right. Yeah, and I think that thinking about collaboration can be with your siblings, can be with family members, can be in your preschool, can be with adults in your life. So as you're thinking about collaboration, those of you listening and attendees, think as you're hearing about Kathy's definitions, share with us what you're doing at home or what you think fits in with collaboration, or any questions that you have about experiences your child may be having, or things you want to check in with Kathy if they fit into collaboration. So I think you started talking about this a little bit, but maybe give us a couple examples, Kathy, while people are chatting about things an adult can do to support development in this area.
Yeah, as I say, I think it's anything that's a kind of back and forth is a great way to build collaboration. And sometimes collaboration and communication go together. So, for example, I know quite often with the kids, I tell stories with them, and we generate these, like, amazing things. I hate getting up in the morning. I don't know about your listeners, but so I invented a game, and it's called When You Wake Up in the Morning and You're Lying in Bed. You close your eyes and open them. At this point, we both rub our eyes, and you're somewhere else instead. Where are we? And that allows you to go anywhere in the world without getting out of bed, which is really amazing if you like sleep.
Yeah.
So, we've gone to forests, we've gone to different planets, we've gone to different countries, and every time something is about to happen, like the dinosaur is about to consume us, we jump in and go, when you wake up in the morning and you're lying in bed, you close your eyes and open them. You're somewhere else instead. And all of a sudden, we're rescued. Notice that we're doing that totally together. We pick the place together. We move on together. So story time is great. Singing is great. Last night with my 2-year-old, we had a wonderful time. We were on FaceTime forever because he wanted to sing The Wheels on the Bus. No, I'm sorry, The Wheels on the Train. And he wanted to have different animals on the train. So that's precisely what we did. And each one made their own noises. And he added the noises. And he added which animal it would be. So anytime you're doing these things together, building it together, reading stories together, singing together, or just rolling a ball back and forth, building a structure back and forth, that's collaboration.
Great. Those are some, I think, really practical ways for people to think about collaboration, and probably some things that happen all the time, like the singing songs that people aren't really thinking about, this is developing an important school readiness skill.
No, exactly. And, a lot of kindergarten teachers were surveyed a couple years ago, and they asked what the very single best quality you needed to really be a success in kindergarten. It was being collaborative, knowing how to get along with other kids and to kind of control yourself a little bit. That social component's very, very important.
So important. So building on the social component of collaboration, let's get into communication. Tell us about what that is.
So communication is really learning how to listen to other people and to respect other people's feelings and thoughts, to express your own feelings and thoughts. It's about having strong language skills, and strong language skills in a number of different areas, not just memorizing vocabulary, which is sometimes what we think about. But it turns out that better reading scores come from better language scores. Why would that be so? Because the children who have better language scores can speak full sentences, tell stories. They're the ones who have the largest vocabularies. And those vocabularies aren't divorced. They aren't like a list like you learned in an SAT. They're very much integrated with the bodies of knowledge that the kids have. So the more they learn, the better their vocabulary becomes, the better their language structures become. By the way, in 1 or 2 languages or 3 languages, children are very, very capable of learning more than one language. It's the natural way across the world. And all of these help our children develop strong skills.
So again here, just to the listeners, if you have thoughts or questions or examples, put them in chat. We won't be able to get to all of them certainly, but we'll do our best to get to the ones that we can. So again, Kathy, I think that you're giving some really interesting examples that people might just think of as, oh, those are day-to-day, they just happen all the time, and not really giving them credit for what a learning experience or opportunity they are. So just the being really mindful about the teaching listening skills as well as communication, articulating idea, and how much all of those skills build just the overall kind of suite of literacy and language communication skills.
Yeah, in fact, in the literature that I work in, and I do work in language and literacy, we know that just being able to tell a story, to act out a story, is related to your later reading skills.
Yeah, and I know some of the research that you cite talks about that we have to be mindful about automation, and that having human interaction and communication skills are going to be differentiators of the future, more important than they are now even.
Oh, even more important. And, it's very interesting in light of that, just as a little cautionary note, is that as parents, and I've noticed myself doing this too, sometimes that email is sitting there, so you want to look there instead of at your child or your cell phone. You just got a text. I mean, I can't tell you how many places I go where the parent is focused in on the cell phone as opposed to in the child's eyes. And that's what we call a communication breaker. And we've actually studied that. Somebody recently gave it a name that I quite like, technoference. But notice it's not about the child on devices as much as it is us on our devices and those getting in the way of having the rich conversations that every parent needs to have with their children in order to help their children's language grow.
So yeah, that's, I think, a really important point and such a valuable way to think about this communication skill. I know a couple of people are asking questions about growing communication skills, and I'll just remind us back to the chart too, as well, as to not worry about if your child is doing something on time as much as just thinking about helping them progress through each phase. So just one quick question, Kathy. People are wondering a little bit about how to grow children's skills if they're not good listeners or they interrupt a lot. How do you help children develop new communication skills?
Well, I mean, the important thing that we can actually do for our children in growing communication skills is to have conversations with them. I know it sounds so simple. It almost sounds trite, but I really mean it. To have conversations about the things that they are interested in. And when we do that, whether it's making food in the kitchen and taking turns there, or whether it's telling them a story about when they were little, I know they're still little, but they think they're big sometimes, these kinds of things, showing pictures, and you would not believe it, even the kids who run around all the time, they're great at looking at their own pictures of themselves when they were a baby, or listening to a book before bed. And all that requires having that conversation. So that's the simplest and, believe it or not, the easiest way to help our children learn to be better listeners.
Great. Yeah, such a simple example. Again, something that we might not give enough credit for how easy that is. And it's so fun to reminisce on their stories of when they were even littler.
Mm-hmm. They love it.
Yeah, they love it, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and they love hearing stories about us too.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So let's move to content, and this is the one that's kind of like the stereotype of school readiness. But I know that you, in your introduction, talked about this, not just the content, which is important, but also how to learn. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I sure can. And notice that content is a little broader than we're used to thinking as well. So, for example, science is content. After our little shadow example, Ellie goes around knowing the word hypothesis and prediction. And she's used it with me since then because she generalized it. So, it's not just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. Also, some of the things that you would never believe are important are playing with blocks, playing with puzzles. Would you believe that being able to copy block designs when you're 3 years old actually relates to your math readiness score at the beginning of kindergarten? That's amazing, right?
Yeah, that is amazing.
I mean, we don't think about it, but it turns out that spatial knowledge like blocks and puzzles, doing mazes, has a lot to do with math. They're even represented in the same part of the brain, which is kind of cool. Also, for learning to learn skills, with this much information, we're all going to need to know how to learn our whole lives so that we can pick up new information and pick it up quickly. And that involves something that in the field is called executive function skills: attention, flexibility, memory, and impulse control. Now you wonder, what in the world could we possibly do to build that? Simon Says. Oh, I kid you not. In order to play Simon Says, you have to control your impulses. In order to clap hands like I do, you have to be able to be listening. And you have to control your impulses. So notice how I can build so many things so quickly. Treasure hunts, building attention. So all of these things that you do anyway turn out to be important for building this suite of foundational skills.
Yeah, I think probably some parents have heard this phrasing around executive function, and that's what you're talking about, is this ability to handle flexible thinking and make decisions in the moment and control your impulses, and how all those things work together to help you be successful no matter what the content is.
Exactly.
And another thing that I'll just reemphasize the conversation we were having earlier about play is that no matter what the content is, if as long as it's taught in a meaningful, playful way within context, children will learn it and know how to apply it much better than they ever would if they were just being tested or doing a worksheet or memorizing facts on a flashcard. That's much harder for them to learn because it has no context. It's not interesting. They're not self-motivated to do that. So much easier to do all of this through playful experiences.
Yeah. And the kids stay at it longer.
Yeah.
Right?
Perseverance and persistence at a task, and they learn through that.
I mean, anytime we like something, we're more likely to do it.
Yeah, we think about ourselves as adults and the things that we persist at. They're interesting to us, and we are having fun while doing them.
Exactly.
So let's talk about critical thinking. Tell us more about that. I know we got a couple of questions about what exactly does critical thinking look like for early childhood, for little kids. So tell us more about this one.
Well, critical thinking was one of the examples I gave you before in that Babar book.
Right.
But let me give you another example of critical thinking. I mean, sifting through all the information and figuring out what you need to do to solve a problem. That's what critical thinking really is all about. What's relevant? Irrelevant. What do I sift out? What do I sift in? So I have to give you one more example from Ellie. I know I'm just gathering up examples from Ellie here. But she was just 4 when her marble rolled under the couch. Ellie was distraught because she could not figure out how to get the marble out, and it kind of disappeared in the back of the couch. So her mom brilliantly said, "Oh, why don't you see if you can solve the problem?" She didn't do it for her. She didn't let the tantrum work. She said, "Let's figure it out." And Ellie said, "Well, I could reach under the couch and see if I feel it." And so Ellie comes running back and says, "I reached under the couch with my projected arm." I'm not sure where this wording came from. "And I couldn't find the marble." So her mother says, "Oh, too bad. Maybe your projected arm, whatever that is, isn't long enough. What else could you use that would make your arm longer?" And Ellie looked around the kitchen, and she thought, my gosh, a spatula might do it. But the spatula, alas, was still too short. So she found some extender thing that we had for a broom, She put it under the couch using her arm, got the marble, and was able to sweep it out to the side. To my mind, that is critical thinking.
Yeah, and the thing that really struck me about your example is all it takes is to note that a child has identified a problem, and instead of solving it for them, to ask them.
Exactly. Go the next distance. That's exactly right. And our children are amazing at following through with this and helping us solve the problem. And I think, there's a lot of critical thinking that's going on by our children all the time. They may not get it right, but that's okay if they use data to help them answer a question.
Yes, and I think I'll just keep emphasizing here that, when people are thinking about these skills, the best way to do them is through this. If it's their problem or something they're motivated to solve, they'll be more attentive to that. They'll stay with it longer. They'll be engaged themselves because they're not being told to do it or sat down to study, but it's all happening through things they're already interested in.
Mm-hmm. And again, you just wouldn't believe what they can come up with. Like how many ways can you pick up the puddle that mess that you just made, water spilled on the floor, Yeah. And it's interesting to see if you say, how would you solve it? And they come up with a solution that as an adult, you're thinking, well, that's not going to work. But let them try. And sometimes they really surprise you with how that goes. And so much critical thinking and executive function development happening through that experience. Absolutely. And there's also these great games like, what's the name of that game, Simon, I think, where you end up pressing lights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yes. There are games out there where you have to, there's one called Set that is a critical thinking game. I mean, there's a lot of them. Once again, you use this lens, you'll start to see it everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I bet when people walk away from this webinar, the participants will be noticing these natural opportunities all over the place, board games being one of them. I'm going to move us to creative innovation, and I think your granddaughter might have an example here as well, or maybe your grandson. I was thinking about the creative use of how to reach under with a projected arm under the couch. But creative innovation is just the way of the future. It's the way of now and the way of the future. So what does this look like for young children?
And there's a lot of creative innovation going on at makers fairs all over the country. So, don't throw away the old toilet paper rolls, right? Or the paper towel rolls. What can our kids be doing with it? One of my favorite examples came from a school in San Francisco, and I went to observe the school, and the first thing they did in the morning at that school was the teacher walked in and he put down a wok, the wok you cook with. And he looked at all the children and said, "This is not a wok. What is it?" And all the kids, spontaneously, one by one, they would come into the center of the circle, and one said, "It's a sled." And another one said, "It's a hat." And I thought, what a way to start your school, because you're starting with everybody knowing that it was okay to go outside the box in the way that you think.
Yeah, there's a great book that says this is not a box, right? That's why children like the cardboard boxes or the shoe boxes or the pots and pans or the loose parts outdoors. There's so much opportunity to be creative.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's do this. The last C on the list, confidence. Tell us more about this one.
So confidence is really about several things. One is growth mindset, knowing that you can get better. You're not stuck where you are. And for parents, it's really important for us to understand that our children have incredible potential. It's not like they're smart or not smart, curious or not curious. We can help them by just creating situations which allow them to grow and letting them know that we believe they can grow, which I think is another big thing. When they're on their own problem sets, the other thing they'll do is persist on it. They'll really try to make the tallest tower if you give them that challenge. And that persistence turns out to be a very important skill that's part of confidence. And finally, learning from failure. I think when we were in school, we came to feel that failure was a bad thing, but failure is actually a very good thing. Thomas Edison writes about how important he was that he failed so many times before finally getting to the light bulb.
Yeah, doesn't he say something like, I didn't fail, I just learned 10,000 ways that didn't work.
Exactly. Well done.
Yeah, that growth mindset, I think, in my own children that are teenagers and then in children and families that I work with is a huge opportunity to help children feel like it's not you're not good at something, it's not a fixed definition, that you can change, you can grow, you can learn, you can make a difference in your own skills and competencies. You're not just defined by them from the beginning.
Right. And I think sometimes that this skill is even called grit.
Yes, yeah, that's Angela Duckworth's work, I think, has been really influential in using that terminology.
Yep, you got it.
So wrap us up here. So we're thinking about the whole child, so we don't want to just think about cognitive and even more narrowly academics when we're thinking about school readiness and what prepares a child for future success. What should we walk away with remembering about the 6 C's and whole child development?
I think the most important thing to learn about is that all the pieces fit together. The second is that they build on one another. It's not a one and done. And maybe the third is that in the olden days, which probably is only like 5-6 years ago, we used to talk about things like the social versus the cognitive self. Or we used to talk about soft skills. Ugh, can't stand that name. Or non-cognitive skills versus cognitive skills. What we've learned in the science is that that does not exist. That really everything is a social skill. Everything that we do. What makes us different from the apes is what my colleague and friend Mike Tomasello calls that we are the ultra-social species. That's our hallmark in life as human beings. Our brain is wired for it. And so everything goes through the social. So if we think we can just jump to content, we're kidding ourselves. And in fact, in a 21st century world that we live in, that's populated with devices and gadgets and gizmos, we're much better off if we think of all the different skills that you need in a breadth of knowledge approach.
Yes. So, I think about a race and with all the different developmental skills, and if the academics is way out in front of the others, then everything else is kind of falling behind. But if you kind of join hands and do it collectively, everything gets there faster and better.
Well, it's actually, the better's the real key to what you just said, Rachel. It's truthfully, if you get there faster, the chances are pretty high that you don't really know it.
Right.
You've just memorized it. In order to do it well and to really have good content knowledge, you have to build up from these other skills as well. Otherwise, you're building on quicksand.
Yeah. As soon as I said that, I thought, actually, I was thinking about earlier or faster. There's no points for that. No CEO's job description says I read faster than anyone else in preschool, right?
Well, actually, it's even worse than that. It turns out they did a full-blown study in New Zealand, and when they did it, they found out that not only could you generally not tell the difference in the early and late readers, but by age 7, but the kids who read a little later actually did a little better.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So one last participant question quickly. If parents are feeling that their child is struggling in any of these areas, maybe not collaborating with their peers, maybe not wanting to communicate or listening, losing interest, shy, not having a lot of confidence, what is your just general advice to parents when they're thinking about these 6 C's in their child's development?
Sure. Well, I think thankfully all of our children are individuals. And so just like we have a profile on these skills, our children will too. You don't have to be the best at everything. I mean, I'm trying to think of anyone who really is, maybe Superman, but even Superman can be hit by kryptonite, you know? So I think the key is to give our children opportunities at each of the levels on the grid, and to have things in our homes, in our classrooms, in the environments outside our classrooms that allow our children to really explore that confidence. It's okay if our children get a skinned knee, if they actually feel proud that they could go in the monkey bars. You know, and I'm not saying to do things that are not safe, but if you can do things that are at mild risk and let our children really feel what that's like, or if we can give our children these fun games to do for critical thinking, or let them try a little harder with just learning people's names and faces, or even, we used to play a game. I had one child who wasn't very good at reading social cues. And so I used to turn on some TV programs and turn off the sound, and we'd play a game of guessing what was happening. There are lots of things you can do once you start thinking through the grid.
So I have so many questions, Kathy, and love to keep this conversation going. I know we're close to end of time, so I'm guessing a lot of parents and listeners are just really fascinated by learning more about the 6 C's, and I can't recommend your books enough, especially Becoming Brilliant. I recommend that to all those listening today. So thanks for your time, Kathy. Thanks for the explanations and the suggestions, and I've really enjoyed this conversation about the new school readiness.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, and I just want to thank Rachel and Kathy once again for a really great conversation. All of you for participating and joining Bright Horizons for this family webinar on this new school readiness. We'll see you at the next one. Thanks so much.